Your mission as an empath in an emotionally dead world. Here's Jung's most revolutionary discovery. Empaths aren't victims of a cruel psychological dynamic. They're evolutionary agents sent to heal humanity's emotional wounds. Your sensitivity isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature designed to upgrade the entire human operating system. Jung realized that what appears as personal suffering in empathic individuals actually serves a collective healing function. You're not just feeling your own emotions, you're sensing and processing buried feelings that entire cultures need to acknowledge. Your empathic responses often reflect what society needs to feel, but has learned to suppress. Think about it this way. In a world where people are taught to disconnect from authentic emotion, where sensitivity is mocked and empathy is seen as weakness, someone has to keep the flame of feeling alive. Someone has to remember what healthy emotional expression looks like. Someone has to model emotional authenticity for those who have forgotten how to access their own hearts. That someone is you. The empath's true purpose. Jung discovered that empaths serve three critical functions in human evolution. First, you're emotional archaeologists, excavating buried feelings that others have suppressed. When you respond empathically to someone's pain, you're not just offering comfort, you're showing them that their emotions are valid and deserve attention. You're proving that feeling deeply is possible and necessary. Second, you're authenticity ambassadors, demonstrating that vulnerability can coexist with strength. In a world that equates emotional openness with weakness, your existence challenges that fundamental lie. You prove that the most sensitive people are often the strongest, because it takes incredible courage to keep your heart open in a world that punishes emotional honesty. Third, your evolutionary bridges, connecting humanity's emotionally suppressed present with its emotionally liberated future. Jung believed that the collective human psyche was evolving toward greater emotional intelligence and authentic connection. Empaths are early adapters of this evolution, showing others what's possible when we stop killing our feelings to fit social expectations. The conscious service model. Jung developed what he called the conscious service model for empaths who understand their evolutionary role. Instead of unconsciously absorbing everyone's pain and burning out, you learn to serve strategically, offering your gifts to those who can receive them, while protecting yourself from those who would exploit or resent them. This means recognizing that not everyone is ready for your medicine. Some people need to stay in emotional numbness longer before they're ready to feel again. Trying to force empathic healing on someone who resents it serves neither of you. Your job isn't to save everyone, it's to be available for those who genuinely seek emotional healing. Conscious service also means understanding that your empathy is precious and finite. You don't owe everyone unlimited access to your emotional energy. Learning to say no to emotional vampires isn't selfish, it's strategic. It preserves your gifts for people who will actually benefit from them. The light bearer's responsibility. Jung believed that empaths have a sacred responsibility to protect their authenticity, not just for themselves, but for collective healing. Every time you dim your light to make others comfortable, humanity loses a little more emotional wisdom. Every time you suppress your natural responses to avoid criticism, the world becomes a little more emotionally impoverished. But every time you maintain your authenticity despite attacks, you're keeping alive the possibility that others can reclaim their own buried feelings. Every time you respond with genuine empathy, despite being called too sensitive, you're proving that emotional authenticity is stronger than emotional suppression. Your light isn't just yours, it belongs to everyone who needs evidence that feeling deeply is still possible in this world. The children who are learning to shut down their emotions need to see that some adults maintained theirs. The wounded adults who buried their sensitivity need to see that resurrection is possible. The future generations need you to keep emotional wisdom alive until they're ready to receive it. The ultimate integration at the highest level of development. Jung observed that empaths learn to hold their gifts with both strength and compassion. They maintain their authenticity while understanding that others' resentment comes from pain rather than malice. They shine their light fully while having empathy for those who cannot yet tolerate that brightness. This is what Jung called luminous compassion, the ability to remain empathically open while being psychologically protected. You understand that people attack your light because they're living in darkness, not because your light is too bright. You maintain your emotional aliveness while having compassion for those who learned to emotionally die. The ultimate integration means recognizing that you came here not to fit into an emotionally suppressed world, but to help transform it into an emotionally liberated one. Your sensitivity isn't a survival challenge, it's a gift to humanity. Your empathy isn't a personal curse, it's medicine for collective healing. Jung's final message to empaths was clear. Stop trying to dim your light for those who prefer darkness. Stop suppressing your gifts to gain acceptance from those who resent them. The world needs your authenticity, your sensitivity, your emotional aliveness. You were born to be an empath, not as punishment, but as purpose. Your mission isn't to become less empathic, it's to become a more protected, conscious, and strategic empath, one who serves from overflow rather than depletion, one who offers healing to those ready to receive it while maintaining boundaries against those who would destroy it. You are not too much for this world. This world simply hasn't caught up to your level of emotional evolution yet. Keep burning bright. Humanity's emotional future depends on it. The feeding frenzy inside the four-stage energy extraction process. What Jung discovered about the energy extraction process is so methodical, so systematic, that it reads like a predator's hunting manual. These aren't random encounters or accidental. Draining this is a four-stage psychological operation, designed to turn your greatest strength into your biggest vulnerability. Stage 1. Light recognition. Energy parasites possess an almost supernatural ability to identify empaths within minutes of meeting them. Jung noted in his clinical observations that narcissistic personalities could spot empaths across crowded rooms. They recognized the telltale signs: the person who listens more than they speak, who asks thoughtful questions, who seems genuinely interested in others' well-being. But it goes deeper than behavior. They can sense what Jung called the glow of generosity, that energetic quality of someone who gives more than they take, who feels deeply, who carries emotional responsibility for others. You might think you're just being friendly, but an energy parasite. You're lighting up like a neon sign that says available for emotional labor. Stage 2. The wound display. Here's where it gets diabolical. The parasite doesn't approach with demands or obvious neediness. Instead, they approach with carefully curated vulnerability. They share their trauma, their childhood wounds, their struggles with depression or anxiety. They present themselves as deep, sensitive souls who have simply been misunderstood by a shallow world. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but energy parasites have learned to become who you need them to be. They study your responses, learn what triggers your compassion, and then amplify those triggers. If you respond to childhood trauma stories, they'll have endless tales of parental neglect. If you're drawn to artistic sensitivity, they'll suddenly become misunderstood creative souls. This isn't authentic vulnerability, it's performed pain designed to activate your empathy. And it works because empaths are biologically programmed to respond to emotional distress with caregiving behaviors." Stage 3. Empathy, activation, and energy harvesting. Once they've hooked your compassion, the systematic extraction begins. They create crisis after crisis that requires your emotional labor. They call during your work hours with emergencies that somehow always need your immediate attention. They trauma dump for hours without ever asking about your day, your struggles, or your needs. Jung observed that empaths consistently mistake being needed for being loved. The energy parasite exploits this confusion masterfully. They make you feel special, chosen, like you're the only person who truly understands them. "You're so different from everyone else," they'll say. "You actually care." This feels like love, but it's actually addiction. They're addicted to your energy, and you're becoming addicted to being needed. The most insidious part of this stage is the reciprocity illusion. Energy parasites are masters at making you feel like the relationship is mutual. They'll occasionally ask about your problems, but notice what happens when you share. Do they offer the same quality of attention you give them? Do they follow up on your struggles the way you follow up on theirs, or do they quickly redirect the conversation back to their issues? Stage 4. Depletion normalization. This is the most dangerous stage because it's where your reality becomes completely distorted. The parasite convinces you that feeling drained is proof of how deep your connection is, that exhaustion equals love, that your emotional overwhelm means you're just a highly sensitive person rather than someone being systematically exploited. They gaslight you into believing that healthy relationships naturally involve one person carrying the emotional load for both people. They normalize your depletion by framing it as evidence of your compassion, your depth, your spiritual evolution. Jung documented patients who would describe feeling wrung out after interactions but would immediately blame themselves. "I must not be spiritual enough, they'd say. If I were more evolved, I could handle this better. The energy parasite encourages this self-blame because it keeps you focused on fixing yourself rather than questioning their behavior. The feeding frenzy reaches its peak when the empath begins to organize their entire life around the parasite's emotional needs. Your schedule revolves around their crises. Your energy is constantly being redirected toward their problems. Your own growth, dreams, and well-being get pushed aside because there's always another emergency requiring your immediate attention. This isn't love. It's not even friendship. It's energetic cannibalism disguised as connection. And Jung's research shows that without intervention, this pattern will continue until the empath is completely depleted. The shadow merger, when you begin to lose yourself in their darkness. Here's where Jung's research becomes absolutely terrifying. The longer you allow energy parasites to feed on your light, the more you begin to merge with their shadow. You don't just lose your energy, you start to lose your identity, your sense of reality, and your connection to your own authentic self. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection reversal. And it's the most devastating stage of energy because the victim becomes complicit in their own destruction. The energy parasite doesn't just take your light, they convince you that giving it away is your spiritual purpose, your calling, your highest form of love. Don't think about how this plays out in real life. You start believing that feeling drained means you're being compassionate, that sacrificing your well-being proves your devotion, that putting everyone else's needs before your own is evidence of your spiritual evolution. The energy parasite's shadow has successfully merged with your conscious mind, turning you into what Jung called the willing sacrifice. This is psychological alchemy in reverse. Instead of transforming lead into gold, the energy parasite is transforming your gold into their lead. Your light becomes their fuel, your strength becomes their crutch, your growth becomes their stagnation. The shadow merger happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, you notice you're always tired after being with them, but you tell yourself, it's because you care so deeply. Then you realize you've stopped talking about your own problems because somehow the conversation always returns to theirs. Next, you find yourself making excuses for their behavior to other people. You don't understand them like I do, or they've been through so much. Jung observed that empaths in this stage begin to take on the emotional characteristics of their energy parasites. You become more anxious because you're constantly absorbing their anxiety. You become more depressed because you're carrying their unprocessed grief. You become more reactive because you're living in a state of perpetual emotional crisis management. But here's the most insidious part. You begin to believe that this emotional chaos is normal, that this is just what deep relationships feel like. The energy parasite has successfully normalized their dysfunction by making it your baseline experience of connection. This creates what I call the empathy trap. Your natural compassion becomes weaponized against you. Every time you try to step back, create boundaries, or prioritize your own needs, your empathic nature floods you with guilt. How can I abandon them when they're in so much pain? You think, what kind of person would I be if I stopped caring? The energy parasite doesn't even have to manipulate you at this stage. You're manipulating yourself on their behalf. Their shadow has taken up residence in your psyche, and it's defending itself by convincing you that self-care equals selfishness, that boundaries equal cruelty. Jung wrote about patients who completely lost touch with their own emotional landscape. During this phase, they could tell you everything about their energy parasite's childhood trauma, their triggers, their needs, their fears, but they couldn't tell you what they themselves were feeling, because they had become completely disconnected from their own inner experience. This disconnection serves the energy parasite perfectly. The more you lose touch with your own needs, desires, and boundaries, the more available you become as an energy source. You become like a tree that's so focused on nurturing the parasitic vine wrapped around it that it forgets to send nutrients to its own roots. The shadow merger also creates what Jung called the martyr complex. You begin to derive your sense of identity from how much you can endure, how much you can give, how much you can sacrifice for others. Your pain becomes your purpose, your depletion becomes your dedication. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. This isn't love, it's not even compassion. It's codependency, masquerading as connection, trauma bonding disguised as devotion. True love doesn't require you to lose yourself. Authentic connection doesn't demand that you become smaller, so someone else can feel bigger. The most heartbreaking realization for empaths in recovery is recognizing how much of themselves they sacrificed in the name of love. But Jung also offered hope. The shadow merger isn't permanent. Once you understand what's happened, once you can see the pattern clearly, you can begin the process of reclaiming your authentic self and learning to love without losing yourself. The awakening, breaking free from the feeding cycle. That the moment you recognize that you've been feeding energy parasites with your light, everything changes. Jung called this the Great Awakening and warned that it would be both the most liberating and most terrifying experience of your empathic journey, because once you see the feeding patterns, you can never unsee them. This awakening often happens in stages. First comes the recognition, that sinking realization that the person you've been pouring your energy into has been systematically draining you. The exhaustion you felt wasn't about your sensitivity. It was about being energetically consumed. The confusion you experienced wasn't about your lack of understanding. It was about being gaslighted into questioning your own reality. Jung observed that this recognition phase often triggers what he called the empathy backlash. Suddenly, you might feel angry, furious, even at how your compassion was exploited. You might feel disgusted by how willingly you participated in your own depletion. This anger is healthy and necessary, but Jung warned that many empaths get stuck here, using their awakening to justify building walls instead of boundaries. The second stage is the boundary implementation, and this is where things get dangerous for empaths because energy parasites don't give up their food source without a fight. Jung documented what I call the extinction burst of the shadow. When parasites can no longer feed easily, they become more desperate and more manipulative. They'll create bigger crises than ever before. They'll threaten suicide. They'll accuse you of being cold, selfish, of not being the person they thought you were. They'll remind you of their trauma, their pain, their desperate need for your support. They'll make you feel like you're betraying a wounded animal rather than protecting yourself from energetic cannibalism. This escalation is actually proof that your boundaries are working, but it feels like evidence that you're being cruel. Jung emphasized that this is the crucial testing phase. Will you cave under the pressure and return to being an energy source, or will you hold firm and complete your transformation? The third stage Jung called the discernment development. This is where you learn to distinguish between genuine need and manufactured crisis, between authentic vulnerability and performed pain, between healthy interdependence and toxic codependence. You develop what Jung called emotional radar. The ability to sense the difference between people who want to share energy reciprocally and those who want to consume it unilaterally. Healthy people will respect your boundaries and even celebrate your growth. They'll understand when you need space, support your healing journey, and reciprocate the emotional energy you invest in the relationship. Energy parasites will do the opposite. They'll punish you for having boundaries, shame you for prioritizing your well-being, and escalate their demands when you become less available. Jung discovered that awakened empaths go through a period he called the relationship purge. Connections built on your depletion will naturally fall away as you stop providing endless emotional labor. This can be terrifying because it might mean losing relationships that felt important, even if they weren't healthy. But here's what Jung promised. You'd rather have one authentic connection than a dozen draining relationships. You'll realize that quality of presence matters more than quantity of people. You'll understand that your light is too sacred to be consumed by those who refuse to do their own inner work. The fourth stage is sovereignty development, where you learn to be an awakened empath who can feel deeply without losing yourself. You discover that you can offer compassion without depleting yourself, help others without hurting yourself, and maintain your empathic gifts without sacrificing your well-being. Jung wrote that sovereign empaths become dangerous to systems built on unconsciousness. An empath who can no longer be manipulated, drained, or controlled threatens every relationship dynamic built on inequality. You become a mirror that reflects others' unconsciousness back to them, a boundary that forces others to take responsibility for their own emotional states. This transformation requires what Jung called the courage to disappoint. You must be willing to disappoint energy parasites who want unlimited access to your light. You must be willing to disappoint people who've grown comfortable using you as their emotional regulator. You must be willing to disappoint society's expectation that empaths should be endlessly available for others. Healing. The awakening isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about becoming who you truly are rather than who others need you to be ... The sovereign empath, mastering your gift without losing your light. Jung's final revelation about empaths will change everything you thought you knew about your gifts. Your light isn't meant to be consumed by others. It's meant to illuminate your own path toward wholeness. When you become what Jung called a sovereign empath, you don't lose your ability to feel deeply. You gain the power to feel consciously. The sovereign empath represents the highest evolution of empathic development. At this level, your sensitivity becomes a superpower rather than a vulnerability. You can sense others' emotions without absorbing them, offer healing presence without taking on their wounds, and maintain deep connections without depleting your own resources. But achieving sovereignty requires mastering what Jung called the light method, a framework for protecting your energy while keeping your heart open. The first principle is learning to discern energy signatures. Every person carries what Jung called a feeling-toned complex that your empathic abilities can read if you know what to look for. Energy parasites feel different in your system than healthy people. With parasites you feel drained, anxious, confused, or emotionally hijacked during and after interactions. With healthy people, you feel energized, clear, peaceful, or inspired. Your body becomes a sophisticated radar system that can detect energetic incompatibility before your mind even processes what's happening. The second principle, Jung called shadow integration, owning the parts of yourself that made you vulnerable to energy parasites in the first place. For most empaths, this means confronting your unconscious need to be needed, your terror of abandonment, your belief that love must be earned through service. Ask yourself, what do I get out of being needed by broken people? How does rescuing others help me avoid my own healing? What childhood wound am I trying to heal through others? This isn't about self-blame, it's about consciousness. The goal is to make these patterns conscious so they don't unconsciously drive your relationship choices. The third principle is what Jung called sacred energy guardianship. Your energy is finite and sacred. Every moment you spend processing someone else's unhealed trauma is a moment you can't spend growing your own light. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual responsibility. This means saying no to emotional labor that depletes you, refusing to carry other people's unprocessed emotions, and choosing relationships that nourish rather than drain you. It means recognizing that your empathic abilities are gifts to be shared consciously, not resources to be consumed unconsciously. The fourth principle Jung termed authentic nature honoring. Energy parasites are attracted to empaths who dim their light to make others comfortable. The more you hide your gifts, deny your intuition, or minimize your sensitivity, the more you become a target for those who want to consume what you're suppressing. Jung believed in individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who others need you to be. For empaths, this means owning your sensitivity as strength, trusting your intuition as wisdom, and using your gifts consciously rather than unconsciously. The final principle is wisdom through transformation. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely, including accepting that you've been targeted by energy parasites, not because you're weak, but because you carry something precious that unconscious people want to consume. You become a sovereign empath. You stop attracting energy parasites and start drawing in conscious beings who can match your emotional depth without depleting your resources. But Jung warned that this transformation comes with responsibility. You must become the kind of person you want to attract. If you want conscious relationships, you must become conscious yourself. If you want reciprocal connections, you must learn to receive as well as give. If you want authentic love, you must show up authentically rather than performing roles others want you to play. Jung understood that the battle for your light is fundamentally spiritual. When you protect your energy and set boundaries, you're engaging in what he called the war for your soul. Your essence, your life force, your very identity is at stake. But here's Jung's ultimate promise. When you become a sovereign empath, you don't just protect your own light, you become a beacon that shows others how to kindle their own inner flame. You stop being a source to be consumed and become a catalyst for others' growth. The awakened empath is humanity's hope for conscious connection, authentic relationship, and genuine love. Master your gifts, protect your light, and illuminate the path for others to follow.